Hello, welcome back, and today I'm really excited because we're going to be starting off a new series here. But to begin, I'm going to be reading off a quote from Yuri Bezmenov, the former KGB agent who defected to Canada. Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you can do, all Americans needs to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see. I'm also going to read off a quote from John 14:6. Jesus told them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. At first, it might seem kind of strange to quote Jesus and Yuri Bezmenov at the same time. Yuri here is referring to the truth of the matter about organized deception between one government apparatus against another. It is about the ideological capture of the enemy. In other words, the obvious use of ideological warfare is right in front of our eyes and that we can see it. Jesus here is talking about the spiritual truth about what is real, about Jesus himself. He's referring to himself as the way, the truth, and the life. The truth is found right in front of us. The way is found right in front of us. And the life is found in Jesus. And we confess that he is Lord, and we understand that it is through him that we are saved. While Yuri was talking about the reality in which our enemy is ideologically subverting us, Jesus is providing an answer to that stronghold and that subversion. The series that we're going to be getting into today will be covering the ideological strongholds that we have and how Jesus is the answer. We live in a demoralized and destabilized world, one that lives in blind, willful ignorance. But we know that we are set apart from the willful blindness of the world. Therefore, I say this and testify in the Lord. You should no longer walk as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thoughts. They are darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, and because of the hardness of their hearts. They became callous and gave themselves over to promiscuity for the practice of every kind of impurity with a desire for more and more. But that is not how you came to know Christ, assuming you heard about him and were taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, to take off your former way of life, the old self that is corrupted by deceitful desires, to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, the one created according to God's likeness in righteousness and purity of the truth. We find ourselves in an era that certainly feels unique. The multifaceted challenge that we face as Christians seems to be a battle for definition, clarity, and understanding. The world is demoralized, pummeled by the many different interpretations of what should be or what is. Many want a justification for what they want their world to look like, which is dressed up nicely as your truth. And this allows a permissive nature of any action the person takes to allow them to sin and have a moral justification for doing so. This pathway that many follow leads to destruction and unease, and society feels so much more fractured and stabilized because of this poisonous ideology. But it's important to be focused on what is happening here, because at its root, we are not fighting against the people who hold these beliefs, but we are fighting against the strongholds themselves. For although we live in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh, since the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but are powerful through God for the demolition of strongholds. We demolish arguments and every proud thing that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to obey Christ. For the next few weeks, I want to specifically talk about these four movements in modern society that have these ideological strongholds: materialism, nihilism, woke, and post woke. For the rest of this series, I want to set this up so that we can explore how these movements are not just strongholds today, but some of them have a history to them. I also want to emphasize how these movements are all permissible in how they handle sin, but also how they encourage a life that is separate from God. I also want to cover how some of these ideologies have a church counterpart. For the rest of our time together, I want to cover a few bases as we begin this series. First, I want to cover this in a way that is both precise and fair. Just as we wouldn't use a chainsaw to do open heart surgery, this is the sort of precision that is going to be required to get people to understand the strongholds that they have. We are in the business of not harming people that are sick, that we want to save those who want to be saved, and not to lose people who don't fully understand. As so much of these ideologies run extremely close to people's heart, as they run extremely close to the core of who people are going to feel naturally attacked. That doesn't mean we shy away from presenting the truth, as the truth is what sets people free. But there needs to be recognition to the followers of these beliefs that they are not our direct foe, just as we saw from the previous reading. We see in our society how these ideologies tear each other apart and how we have been estranged from those who just simply disagree with us. Many are led to believe that our victory must be a political one, it must be a material one, or a victory which ideology must be fought with other ideology. But we must not fall into the trap of letting the enemy draw the battle lines. We must resist blind tribalism, which leads to demoralization and destabilization of society. Our neighbor is not our enemy, as we are supposed to treat our neighbors as ourselves. This leads to my next point. This is not meant to be a series that is based on politics. Many of you who know me understand where I'm coming from with this. In full disclosure, I'm a libertarian. Regardless, this will not be a battle on right versus left, particularly in the discussion of woke and post woke. In brief summary, those who lean right favor freedom and tradition, and those who lean left favor fairness and creativity. And the church is well served by both viewpoints here. This has no bearing on any specific policy, the party that someone belongs to, or the politicians themselves, which are all in a separate consideration and all different things. In other words, your neighbor is not a political party. Our politics are to be informed by our faith, and through that we unite. Someday I will do a series that speaks more to this, but I don't believe that this is the appropriate series. What I will say is that on the very extreme end, we will be talking about woke. But just for that consideration, I am also going to mention there too, this is a different consideration than someone who claims to be liberal in orientation. This is also meant to be an overview of the subjects. So we're going to cover this not in granular detail, but just to do an overview of these subjects. When we come back later in a different series and cover them in more detail, if that's a possibility, I know that for woke, we're probably definitely going to go back and dive into that in a more deep fashion much later down the line. That being said, at least for now, I just want to do just enough to get an idea of what they're getting at and what the main drive is, what the belief system is, and just enough for us to cover it to understand that this is an ideological stronghold that opposes itself against the Christian worldview. This series will also be breaking the general format that I had in the last series, but we're going to be returning to that. But I wanted to quickly go through some of the authors of the books, the podcasts, and just some of the people that have really influenced this series to a degree. Explaining Postmodernism by Stephen Hicks, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, Thou Shalt Not Be a Jerk by Eugene Cho, Stolen Youth by Carol Markowitz and Bethany Mandel, Intellectuals by Paul Johnson, Why Meadow Died by Andrew Pollock and Max Eden, Race Marxism by James Lindsay, and his podcast was really a fantastic resource for this. Mama Bear Apologetics, Philosophize This, Andrew Klavan's podcast, and William Lane Craig. So that was quite a list. I recommend almost everything on that list to at least read or go over their podcasts. But that's a lot of the influence that went into this. And to stop and quote everything word for word would really slow down what I was trying to do and trying to get at. So I'm really excited for this series. I can't wait to cover this next week with materialism. And until then, God bless, stay salty.